Once upon a time, Lebanon was the most promising, tolerant, and forward-thinking country in the Middle East, shining like a star. Of course, it now longs for those old days. These lands, which have been the heart of trade since time immemorial, have recently declared economic bankruptcy. They didn't just go bankrupt economically. They have been standing before us as a country that has been bankrupt in all its institutions for a long time. In this video of Wireless Magazine, we will look at Lebanon's recent past and present. We will not only look closely, but we will see that there are places where we need to learn lessons. Lebanon is a country on the Mediterranean coast of the Middle East, with Syria to the north and east, Israel to the south, and also has a maritime border with Cyprus in the Mediterranean. It has a rich history and cultural identity due to its location at the intersection of the Mediterranean basin, where history is written, and the Fertile Crescent. Lebanon is located in a place between the mountains that run parallel to the Mediterranean Sea. The tops of these mountains are always snowy, and ships approaching from the sea first see these snowy peaks. Therefore, the Phoenicians who lived in the region named it Lebanon, which means white in their language. Yes, even though snow and Middle East symbols don't often come together in minds, even today there are snowy peaks, and there are ski resorts on these peaks. The country has seen many civilizations rise and fall, embracing and tolerating each one fully. For example, the first Christians fleeing Roman oppression took refuge in the mountains of Lebanon. It remained under Ottoman rule for 402 years between 1516 and 1918. The Ottomans did not interfere with anyone's language or religion here. The communities that settled in Lebanon also preserved their identities and what they brought with them for many years. It was occupied by the French in 1918. This occupation lasted until the end of World War II. After the Nazis occupied France, the French dominance in the Middle East weakened, and Lebanon gained its independence on November 22, 1943. Despite independence, France's influence over the country did not completely end. The French have always had a say in the political structure and have taken on the protection of Christian communities, especially the Catholic Maronites. They also maintained religious and educational activities through missionary movements for years. As a result of all this, French is among the official languages in Lebanon today. The most important person who played a role in its economic development and once made Lebanon the Switzerland of the Middle East is Yusef Beydas. Yusef Beydas, who was born in Jerusalem in 1912 as the son of a Palestinian father and a Lebanese mother, was nicknamed the Jerusalem Genius. Beydas started his career at the Palestine branch of Barclays Bank, which is owned by the British and is still in operation. He then worked at the Arab Bank based in Jordan. He came to his mother's homeland, Lebanon, after the Arab-Israeli War in 1948. Lebanon at that time had escaped from being under French control and was a country trying to recover. Yusef Beydas and three partners founded Intrabank in Lebanon, which would alter the nation's destiny. He generated a large cash flow with the discovery of oil in the Arabian Peninsula. This cash flow was mostly being converted into investment through Cairo, the capital of Egypt. In 1956, also known as the Second Suez Crisis, after the Arab-Israeli War, investors began to leave Cairo. With stricter and more advanced banking rules, Lebanon was now a financial center of this region. The most important institution of this financial center was Intrabank, founded by Yusef Beydas. The rapidly growing Intrabank bought Casino de Liban, which was the world's largest casino at the time. It also bought Middle East Airlines, which was struggling with economic problems, and turned it into one of the most profitable airline companies in the world. Thanks to Middle East Airlines, the capital Beirut became an important destination in the world. Intrabank opened 40 branches, not only within the country, but also worldwide. It owned significant real estates in cities like New York, Marseille, Paris. On the other hand, under the leadership of Intrabank, Lebanon embarked on a major breakthrough during the same years. It became the Middle East's shining star in education, economy, and culture. Literacy rates in the country rose rapidly. Lebanese universities began to be recognized worldwide. Tourism entered its golden age. Beirut, dubbed the Paris of the East for its architecture, became a popular destination for Western tourists. Its unique beaches were attracting Hollywood stars, while its famous casinos were drawing in the ultra-rich. Foreign investors, especially the oil-rich Arabs, were investing in all Lebanese banks and the Lebanese stock market. During this time, many Turks, particularly from Mardin, moved to Lebanon seeking better opportunities and living standards. By the mid-1960s, tensions between the Arabs and Israel began to rise again. Yusef Beydas funded the Palestine Liberation Organization, established in 1964. The Six-Day War, occurred in 1967. During the Arab-Israeli War, known as the Six-Day War, Beydas supported Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was backed by the Soviets. This led foreign investors to withdraw their money from Intrabank and transfer it to their own countries and financial institutions in Europe. Intrabank rapidly declined, announcing its inability to make payments. The collapse of Intrabank brought the Lebanese economy to a standstill, and since that day the country has never been able to recover, both economically and politically. Yusef Beydas left the country after the bankruptcy. He died of pancreatic cancer in 1968 at his aunt's house in Lucerne, Switzerland. Lebanon means a country where dozens of different ethnic groups live together in a small country. We can use this example to explain how small it is. The size of its land is about 1/75 of Turkey. An estimated 6.8 million people live in the country. Approximately 85% of the population are Arabs, 7% are Armenians, 6% are Kurds, and 2% are others. But what's even more important than this are the sects. Sunni, Shia, and Alevi sects make up the Muslim segment, while the Christian segment is made up of Maronite, Greek, Armenian, Syriac, Chaldean, Assyrian, Coptic, and other sects. In addition, Druze and Judaism are also officially recognized beliefs. Looking at the general distribution of all sects, 3 of them stand out. 27% of the country is Shia, 27% is Sunni, and 21% are Maronite Christians. If you noticed, I used the word estimated when talking about the population. The last census in Lebanon was conducted during the French Mandate period in 1932. According to the census, 861,000 people were living in the country. The census included Lebanese living abroad, mostly Christians, in the population count. The 1943 National Pact decisions were based on this census. Later on, conducting a census was banned for fear of a change in political power. According to the latest census data, the Maronite Christians, who constitute the country's largest sect, have fallen behind Sunni and Shia Muslims over time. In the National Pact, the greatest powers were given to the president, who was elected from the Maronites. After the Civil War, the president's powers were limited by the Taif Agreement, and the decision-making mechanism was left to the approval of the Council of Ministers. Lebanon experienced a civil war that lasted 15 years between 1975 and 1990, 2 events that dragged the multi-ethnic structure into this civil war. The economic collapse in the late 1960s and the establishment of Israel, its expansion over the years, and the resulting refugee flows were the reasons. I explained the economy part around Yusef Beydas and Intrabank. The refugee part is as follows. Palestinian refugees started migrating to Lebanon after Israel was established in 1948. Between 1948 and 1967, around 200,000 refugees arrived in the country. This number corresponds to almost 10% of the Lebanese population at that time. After the Six-Day War in 1967, there was again a heavy influx of Palestinian refugees. Simultaneously, some Palestinians also fled to Jordan. However, Jordan's King Hussein grew uneasy with the Palestine Liberation Organization's growing influence in his nation. In 1970, when conflicts arose between the Palestine Liberation Organization and the Jordanian army, Palestinian refugees were expelled from Jordan and headed for Lebanon. After the influx of refugees, the demographic structure of Lebanon completely changed, and its sectarian-based political structure was also shaken. Palestinian refugees now made up about 35% of the population. The shifting ethnic composition and economic hardships started to increase tensions. With the arrival of the Palestine Liberation Organization in Lebanon, Palestinian refugees armed themselves and clashes between different groups accelerated. On April 13, 1975, an attack was carried out in front of the St. Marin Church in Beirut on a bus carrying Palestinian refugees to the Tel al-Zatar camp. The attack was carried out by Lebanese nationalist Christian Maronites. 27 people, including women and children, lost their lives in this attack. The incident is considered the beginning of the Lebanese Civil War. The Lebanese Civil War, which coincided with the Cold War period, lasted 15 years with the involvement of groups supported by regional and global powers. It's as if someone never wanted it to end. On one side was Syria, backed by the Soviet Union, and on the other was Israel, backed by the United States. Both intervened in the Lebanese Civil War. Israel's occupation started in southern Lebanon in 1978 and expanded to Beirut in 1982. In 1982, the Green Line divided Beirut into two parts. The east side was controlled by the Christians, while the Muslims controlled the west side. Israeli soldiers gradually withdrew in 1985, ending the occupation. The 15-year civil war was finally ended with the Taif Agreement signed in 1990. All political prisoners were released with the amnesty issued in March 1991. The Lebanese army was re-established in May of the same year with armed forces, mostly consisting of Hezbollah militants. Despite the civil war ending in 1990, the Syrian army remained in Lebanon until 2005. The assassination of the then Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri in 2005 deeply shook the country. Syria was accused of being behind this assassination, and protests against Syria and Syrian soldiers were held in the country. As a result, Syria was forced to withdraw its armies. When Lebanon gained its independence in 1943, an agreement was reached on a consensus called the National Pact in the country for people of different religions and sects to live together. According to this agreement, the country's president must be chosen from the Maronites, a Christian sect, the Speaker of the Parliament from the Shiites, and the Prime Minister from the Sunnis. The 128 parliamentary seats in the parliament are also divided between Christians and Muslims at a ratio of 6-5. It was also decided to distribute other political duties proportionally according to the population of the sects. This system is still in use. The system, established with good intentions to represent all communities in the country, failed to achieve the desired result and instead became the main source of conflicts, further dividing the nation deeply. Almost every neighborhood had its own party, its own political movement, and its own leader emerged. The people appointed to state duties started working not for the whole country and all the people, but first for the movements they represent. This system also led to the spread of corruption. Every position set up its own corruption scheme. Politicians, bureaucrats, and civil servants holding each position only thought of their own interests because there was no national consciousness and political unity in the country. If they gave up corruption, the share taken from the pie would go to the other group. Therefore, the richest people in Lebanon were mostly those who ruled the country. For example, the current Prime Minister Najib Mikati is the richest person in Lebanon. He amassed the majority of his wealth after serving as the Minister of Public Works and Transport in 1998. He is currently serving his third term as Prime Minister. There is a Hezbollah reality in Lebanon. Hezbollah, declared a terrorist organization by the United States, Canada, Israel, Australia, Saudi Arabia, and many other countries, has a strong structure in Lebanon. They have their own schools, television channels, hospitals, civil society organizations, and armed groups. They are almost like a separate state within Lebanon, having declared their own sovereignty. While the Taif Agreement signed after the Civil War in 1990 required all groups to lay down their arms, Hezbollah did not comply. Today they have a significant presence in the Lebanese parliament. Also, Hezbollah was one of the causes of the Israel-Lebanon War in 2006. In fact, the war began with Israel firing on civilians having a picnic on a beach in Gaza. With this attack, Palestine announced that it had canceled its ceasefire agreement with Israel. About a month after Israel's attack on July 12th, 2006, Hezbollah militants launched missile and mortar attacks on Israeli forces and Israeli towns along the border from their positions in southern Lebanon. They killed 8 Israeli soldiers and took 2 of them as prisoners. Although Hezbollah and Lebanese police claimed that the captured soldiers had infiltrated Lebanese territory, Israel denied these allegations and launched a counterattack. On July 13, 2006, the Israeli Air Force began bombing locations where it believed Hezbollah militants and leaders were located. Beirut and its surroundings were the main areas bombed. The city's infrastructure facilities, hospitals, television and radio stations, roads, and Beirut airport suffered significant damage from the attacks. Around 1,000 civilians died. The damage caused by Israeli attacks on Lebanon was reported to be around $2.5 billion. The month-long war ended with a ceasefire signed on August 14, 2006, as a result of international initiatives. Lebanon's ongoing refugee crisis remains a bleeding wound for the country. When the first refugee influx from Palestine began, they started to gather in migrant camps outside the settlements. After staying in these camps for many years, they transitioned to a settled life and built their own shanties. Lebanon banned the expansion of refugee camps beyond their designated limits. Therefore, as the population increased, they built makeshift new floors on top of the shanties. Bringing building materials into these areas and providing basic infrastructure like sewage and electricity are prohibited. Salty water flows from fountains, wastewater runs off surfaces, illegal electrical wires hang everywhere. The reason for all these primitive living conditions is United Nations aid. If the Lebanese state provides infrastructure services here, the aid will be cut off. People are stuck in such a deadlock. Health services are also provided only by the United Nations and are very limited. With the pandemic on top of it, it became almost impossible to access some health services in refugee camps. Lebanon does not offer citizenship to refugees and restricts their employment in certain professions. On top of all this, nearly 1 million Syrian refugees were added to Lebanon's problems with the Syrian civil war. Lebanon could no longer economically bear the mounting problems, and just a few days ago, Deputy Prime Minister Saadi El-Shami announced that the state of Lebanon and the central bank had gone bankrupt. The economic crisis that started in 2019 worsened following the 2020 Port of Beirut explosion. The country, which has almost no manufacturing industry and meets all its needs through imports, began to use its foreign exchange reserves in the central bank for this purpose, and this pulled the pin on the economy. The minimum wage, which was equivalent to about $440 before the crisis, fell to under $30 due to the significant depreciation in the Lebanese pound. The fuel shortage completely halted the country's economy. Lines stretching for miles formed in front of gas stations. Power outages lasting up to 20 hours a day began to occur. Hospitals reduced services. It became impossible to find medicine in pharmacies. Lebanon stands before us today as a country that has gone bankrupt in every way.